invitation. Thank you for being here and for listening. I will dig into this title, namely Fostering Empathy with 360 Cinematic VR. I will try to lead you into this analysis of a multidimensional construct of empathy and perceived resonance. My name is Martin Smith-Gahrsen. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Agder, located in Kristiansand in Norway, where I live as well. And before I try to unfold and dig into these different concepts that are included in the title, I'll just speak very briefly first a little about virtual reality, what it is and what research has said that it may achieve, accomplish, and what it might not accomplish, and how we place our project in relation to these concepts so far. So is it a hype or is it a hit? You know, that's kind of summing up some of those questions related to the use of virtual reality within educational context. So those telling it is just a hype would emphasize these points. That is just commercially driven entertainment technology, not really suitable for educational purposes. Because it doesn't have these kind of valid educational benefits. Some of them will say that or pose that, and they will point to the fact that there is somehow a lack of software that suits educational purposes, or that it is too costly and or too technologically advanced for use in any school, some would say. Yet, on the other side, people would say that those benefits coming out from the educational use of virtual reality comes down to being immersed, being able to interact, being user involved in the contents of the subject in a totally different way than the more linear text could provide. So being present in different kinds of virtual sceneries, different kinds of virtual situations, being transmitted or transported into situations or places or situations or histories that are too distant to be able to access otherwise will be the great advantage of using VR. And even it is possible to co-create 360 immersive experiences. And that is kind of the main scope of this project. How were we able to do that? And how did we do it? And how did we then combine these VR experiences that the pupils had with other kinds of high taxonomic activities? I'll try to unfold that to you a little bit in this presentation now. So, but first we have to just make it clear, what do we mean with 360 cinematic VR? Now, this kind of VR is somehow simpler than what we call the 360 interactive VR, in the sense that it denotes an experience in which users wear head-mounted displays, often called VR headsets, that enable them, by turning their heads, to gaze around in a virtual or simulated world of moving images, that is 360 videos, typically. As opposed to what we call 360 interactive VR, it conceptually and technically differs from this, because here users can interact more directly in a 3D computer-generated surrounding, where they will also be able to manipulate the protagonists or the trajectories more virtually. So that's more technically advanced and, of course, more expensive. So it's more or often rather impossible to do these kinds of educational projects using full-fledged 360 interactive VR. So in this project, we were then testing out the 360 cinematic version of the virtual reality experiences. Now, previous studies have shown that developing cognitive and affective empathy is negatively correlated with bullying behavior and victimization. So there is a need. I mean, worldwide, there is a need. In Norway, there is a need. In my town, Kristiansand, there is a need to try to develop these kinds of anti-bullying programs, because we don't want bullying, we don't want victimization. Still, there is a persistent call for innovative ways to do this, because they are not always as successful as we would want them to be. So to do this, VR, virtual reality enhancements, have proven successful to elicit empathic responses. And that was the main background information for this project as well. So often virtual reality or VR has been called an empathy machine. And empathy, by using the concept of empathy, we often refer to the ability to comprehend and respond to the emotions, thoughts, and experiences of others. Now, virtual reality may enhance cognitive empathy because these virtual 360 scenes provide the viewers, the experiencers, with vivid visual information depicting detailed and realistic portrayals of protagonist situations. So by being allowed to view this, experience this, being there, being immersed, and feeling the presence of being in these situations, it may enhance these kinds of cognitive empathy. However, it may definitely reach, previous research says, it may definitely elicit emotional empathy, because this sense of presence and immersion in the virtual scenes may transmit the feelings of protagonists over to the viewers in a way that we call emotional contagion. So there is some debate within the research literature on whether virtual reality may actually enhance cognitive empathy. For example, a big meta study conducted by Martin Gano and some others argue that eliciting cognitive empathy requires effortful mentalizing, such as using your own imagination to construct others' experiences, which may very often be acquired through, for example, reading fiction or acting, role-playing, different kinds of situations where you will actively have to mentalize to be able to put yourself in the shoes of others. And they claim that in VR experiences, as they're so vivid and so immersively dense somehow, they may or definitely explicitly display the character's thoughts and feelings, affecting the viewers definitely emotionally, but not necessarily cognitively. So in order to kind of solve this problem of not developing cognitive empathy, but just emotional empathy, they, Martin Gano et al., call for a dual approach, a so-called two-pronged approach, where you incorporate both cognitive and emotional aspects of the VR experiences. And that was inspiring for our project as well. So you would somehow have to add mentalizing tasks to the VR experiences. For example, such as asking how a virtual person is thinking or feeling, asking them to predict what to do next, or explaining why they acted the way they did, so that this mentalizing cognitive aspect is more coming to the forefront in the learning experience. So our research questions were these two. In what ways can the co-creating and engaging with cinematic VR experiences involving ethically complex situations foster empathic responses among lower secondary students in a Norwegian classroom? The first. And the second, can co-creating VR-based teaching and learning resources create moments of resonance for the students? And I will try to explain what I mean about resonance and what I mean about empathy now quite briefly. Now, our model of empathy is derived from what is often reckoned to be the gold standard within empathy enhancement or empathy fostering, derived from Davies' multidimensional construct, which is often used together or alongside this interpersonal reactivity index IRI, which is often used quantitatively, where we then measure these four aspects of empathy, which is perspective taking, fantasy, empathic concern, and personal distress. So the perspective taking mode involves the ability to adopt the psychological viewpoint of others. The fantasy dimension measures the tendency to be transported by imagination into the feelings and actions of fictional characters in books, movies, and plays. The empathic concern assesses other-oriented feelings of sympathy or sympathy and concern for unfortunate individuals. And the personal distress, maybe the most debatable dimension of Davies, measures the extent to which self-oriented feelings of personal anxiety or unease may arise in tense interpersonal settings. So Davies corresponds these different dimensions of empathy with different kinds of social competence. He says that personal or perspective taking is connected to the capacity for non-egocentric behavior. For example, enabling an individual to anticipate the behavior and reactions of others, thereby facilitating smoother and more rewarding interpersonal relationships. Whereas the fantasy dimension is connected to being more susceptible to emotional responses and thereby to exhibit greater sensitivity. The emotional concern dimension is connected to high levels of selflessness and concern for others. And the personal distress dimension correlates with social dysfunction, as individuals with high levels of this dimension tend to be more shy, more socially anxious, and less extroverted. So what about resonance? We have derived the concept of resonance from the German sociologist, Professor Hartmut Rosa, and what he says about resonance, dividing the concept of resonance into 4 different aspects that is kind of serving as a hypothesis for how we hoped that our project would work out for the secondary students, which involves first being affected, Affizierung in German, or being touched, berührt werden. Secondly, being engaged, somehow having agency or to be personal invested in the situations. Selbstwirksamkeit. Third, some kind of a transformation, a personal transformation will occur, Anverwandlung. And lastly, that all these kinds of experiences of resonance are unpredictable. So how can we arrange them still? How can we better facilitate them even though they are unpredictable? That would be a question. So the novelty of our study, then, there has been conducted quite many studies on the use of virtual reality in conjunction with empathy. But this study, the novelty of this study lies specifically in the didactic co-creative design process of reaching these videos and engaging with them and debating and discussing them afterwards. And even the qualitative analysis is new, because very often we always use the quantitative approach to the IRI analysis using Davies' multidimensional construct of empathy. So first, the pupils started co-writing manuscripts on what might happen in the classroom, what might happen with ostracism, what might happen with bullying, and they role-played these situations. And we filmed these situations with 360 cameras. I'll show you a few examples afterwards. And we co-created then, filmed and co-created the videos together with the pupils. And afterwards, we intervened. That is, they experienced the 360 videos and they discussed the contents of them afterwards. And our analyses have been based on the group discussions and preceding interviews with the pupils and teachers afterwards. So we made 5 videos in cooperation with the students. The first one is depicting groups of male peers delivering sexualized comments to one of the passing girls. The next one are showing 2 female students conversing about one of them having been filmed naked in the wardrobe, and that the video has been circulated on the social media platform. The third is showing a female student which is assaulted with sexual comments, but no one responds, including a group of teachers on recess supervision duty who are busy scrolling their smartphones. And video number 4 and 5 are displaying the perspective of one not invited to a party. And all of these videos were tried to be, or it was a goal for us to make them ecologically valid in the sense of the word that the students had come up with these manuscripts themselves. They had role-played them themselves to make them as realistic and down-to-earth and vivid as possible then. So this one video is showing the first. Now these will be talking in Norwegian, so it's kind of hard for you to follow. So I would try to translate if there is sound at all.
Ja, fy faen, han har vært midt i garderoben. Det var jo, hvem var det som filmet på det?
Now I can pan around. These are much better to use
Hva skjedde egentlig med det?
VR headset.
Jeg vet ikke, jeg har ikke sett den. Jeg turte ikke å
Girls
se den.
coming into an ale, they're talking about this video.
Nei, jeg sto bare i garderoben og skifta, så tror jeg kanskje noen filma.
To the right, naked.
Nei, har du sett det?
Ja, men det var ikke så ille.
Er du sikker på at man ikke så den?
Man så men det var ikke ille, liksom.
Er du sikker? Det høres ut som alle hvisker om meg. Nei da. Det går fint.
One of those guys, the one to the right now, is asking, how much can I pay to see more?
Må dere, det er så sykt barnslige.
The guys are laughing, you know. This girl is kind of upset, and they just pass out. Now, why this situation? Well, the students proposed it themselves. So let's just take a look at the next one. A lot of sound, I'm sorry. This will portray a girl not being invited to a party. Now we will come into a hallway. They're sitting in between lessons, and
Kommer dere bare til meg klokka 6 på lørdag da?
Party that is about to be arranged. 100 students will come to the party.
Hva tenker dere å gå med? Jeg skal gå med en ny kjole. Hva med det?
Boys on the suddenly another.
Thomas, du tar meg snacks. Hallo. Hei, Maja.
My name is Maya.
Kommer du på festen?
Ja, selvfølgelig.
Camera. Have you been invited to the party?
Jeg skal gå med en ny
Now it's much better to view it in VR because then you feel that. And she reveals you're not invited to the party.
Er du ikke invitert?
And now she will try to say whether it's possible for her to be invited or whether we should arrange another party to which be invited instead. So kind of chaotic to watch these here. I admit that, but it was just to show to you how we did it. So a much more vivid, of course, and lively experience when the students see them using HMDs. So we use this typological thematic analysis to dig in qualitatively to the discussions and to the preceding discussions and the interviews afterwards. 45 pupils participated in the study, and we have made a thematic analysis of all these group discussions occurring afterwards, using the empathy dimensions of Davis. And this is just an example of how we used it in the analysis. For example, concerning perspective taking, our guiding explanation in the analysis was I put myself in the participant's shoes in the simulated story. Referring to a lot of questions in the IRI Davis module. But for example, before criticizing somebody, I try to imagine how I would feel if I were in their place. Concerning fantasy, I was involved in the feelings of the participants in the simulated story, referring to, after seeing a player movie, I have felt as though I were one of the characters. Emotional concern, sorry. Oh, sorry, that went too far, just another. Went back to the movie, I'm sorry. And no, it's not responding. Okay, there, sorry. Okay, so we're here again. So we had all of these dimensions of empathy. And I will quite soon now go into the findings. I felt sorry for the protagonist in the simulated story, or I felt bad when I experienced the simulated story. Now, how to explain the findings? I will try to do that as briefly as I can now. And how much time have I got?
You have about 4 minutes left.
4 minutes left, thank you. Now, when it came to perspective taking, the students demonstrated an ability to adopt the victim's perspectives. And they managed to identify with the precariousness of victimized protagonists while acknowledging the potentially long-term and devastating effects of verbal harassment or intimidation. And one of them stated, I think it's very painful. I think it really sticks with you deeply, maybe even for years afterwards. Eventually, you start doubting yourself and others. So a lot of them, however, admitted that in intervening in these situations, doing something about them, being not just a witness or a bystander, doing something, intervening might come at a high cost. as that would risk themselves becoming unpopular or subject to bullying themselves. So concerning fantasy, a lot of the students stated that they identified with the feelings of the protagonist experiencing the harassment or the ostracism in the simulated stories. And after experiencing these various simulated scenes, the students described emotions such as feeling unsafe, disturbed, upset, scared, shocked, or sad, or more explicitly, having a knot in the stomach. So they identified quite easily with the girl being harassed with sexual comments. Yet, when approached as the person who is not invited to the party in the virtual simulation, they even easily put themselves in the shoes of the outsider, experiencing this dimension of fantasy then in the story. Concerning emotional concern, several students felt sorry for the protagonists who experienced verbal harassment or exclusion in the simulated stories, and reflecting on the situations afterwards, they expressed a sense of responsibility to intervene in similar such circumstances, either by comforting the victim, defending her against the offenders, or by trying to include her. But, and again, the fear of being excluded themselves held them back, because intervening could be more difficult, even more difficult, if the popular peers carried out the harassment, as one of them stated. I would have wanted to help, but it's not always that easy. You might not be as well liked by the friends you're with. And the personal distress dimension was that watching the simulated situations, it even created feelings of apprehensiveness and helplessness in the students. And these emotions were often connected to the role of being a bystander, observing these peers suffer, yet feeling unable or even unwilling to intervene due to fear of potential reprisals. So when asked what might happen if they intervened in bullying situations, one of the students stated, you could have been yelled at in return, and they'd talk back and say mean things about you. So they openly described the tension between the desire to help on one side and being restrained by anxiety on the other, as intervening might lead to a loss of reputation or social standing, or even result in being treated similarly to the victim, which they, of course, didn't want. Thank you. I think I'll do that. So quite briefly now, and summing up with some of the results and implications of this project. So the portrayal using 360 cinematic videos to show and depict ethically challenging dilemmas in immersive 360-degree videos facilitated an anticipated access to emotional responses and autoethnographic reflection among the students, which we find valuable. And the qualitative analysis showed that eliciting emotional responses and autoethnographic reflection connected to personal distress. I mean, feeling that you want to intervene, but you feel somehow restrained by not wanting to become a victim yourself. Connecting reflections and perspective taking to this feeling of personal distress potentially may lead to pro-social behavior. So you get access to some of these feelings, which might be quite inexact, harder to access using more traditional didactic methods. And even identification with the protagonists in the 360 videos trigger emotional concern, which is anticipated by Davis theory, yet confirming that empathy is a multidimensional construct. And the study then offers empirical nuances to Ross's resonance theory by demonstrating that the co-creation and engagement with VR environments can facilitate moments of affective attunement, which we find an interesting concept in itself for further exploration. Thanks a lot.